What happens when royalty meets reality, television, and a prince forgets that respect goes both ways? In just 26 seconds, one comment would turn a morning interview into the most shocking TV meltdown of the year, ending with a royal escort straight out the studio doors. Good Morning Britain's iconic red sofa had seen its share of heated debates, but nothing could prepare viewers for what was about to unfold. Susanna Reid, the show's beloved host known for her sharp questioning and unflappable professionalism, sat poised and ready. Across from her, Prince Harry settled into his seat with an air that suggested he'd rather be anywhere else. The interview started innocently enough. Susanna welcomed him with her trademark warmth, thanking him for joining the show. But from the very first question, something felt off. There was tension in the air, thick enough to cut. "Your Royal Highness, thank you so much for being here this morning," Susanna began, her smile genuine and professional. "I want to start by asking about your recent comments regarding the British press. You've been quite vocal about your feelings. Can you help our viewers understand your perspective?" Harry shifted in his seat, his jaw already tight. "Well, Susanna, I think it's quite obvious, isn't it? The press in this country has been absolutely relentless. They've made my life and my family's life utterly miserable. I understand that must be difficult," Susanna responded, her tone measured and empathetic. "But many of our viewers might say that media attention comes with the territory of being royal. How would you respond to that?" And there it was. The first flash of something darker crossed Harry's face. "How would I respond?" he repeated, his voice rising slightly. "I'd say that's an incredibly naive view. Just because someone is born into a certain family doesn't mean they deserve to be hunted like animals." Susanna remained calm, nodding thoughtfully. "That's a fair point, and I think many people would sympathize with the intrusion you've experienced. But let me ask you this. When you've chosen to do interviews, write books, and produce documentaries about your private life, doesn't that invite some level of public scrutiny?" Harry's eyes narrowed. "That's completely different. I'm telling my own story, on my own terms. That's called taking back control, something you and the media wouldn't understand." The comment landed with an uncomfortable thud. Susanna's smile remained, but viewers could see the slight stiffening of her shoulders. "I think many journalists, myself included, work very hard to tell stories fairly and accurately. We're not all the same, Your Royal Highness. Aren't you, though?" Harry shot back, leaning forward. "You all work for the same machine. You all benefit from the same system that's designed to tear people down for profit." Susanna took a breath, maintaining her composure beautifully. "I respect your feelings about the press. I truly do. But I have to push back gently here. Good Morning Britain has always tried to give people a fair platform to share their views, including you this morning. We've invited you here specifically so you can tell your side of things without interruption." "Without interruption?" Harry laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You've interrupted me 3 times already, Susanna. Maybe you're not as fair as you think you are." The accusation hung in the air. Anyone watching could see that Susanna had done nothing but ask thoughtful, balanced questions. She hadn't interrupted. She'd simply asked follow-ups, which is what any good journalist does. "I apologize if you feel I've interrupted," Susanna said graciously, though she had nothing to apologize for. "That certainly wasn't my intention. Please, continue with your thought." But Harry wasn't interested in continuing his previous point. He'd found a new target. "You know what the problem is with shows like this? You invite people on, you pretend to be sympathetic, and then you twist everything they say to fit your narrative. It's manipulative." Susanna's professionalism was being tested, but she held firm. "I can assure you, that's not what's happening here. We want to hear from you, genuinely. Our viewers deserve to hear different perspectives, including yours." "Your viewers?" Harry scoffed. "Your viewers are fed whatever you want them to believe. They sit at home, drinking their tea, and they lap up every word you say like it's gospel. It's actually quite sad." There was an audible gasp from someone off camera. Susanna's co-host shifted uncomfortably in his seat beside her, but Susanna herself remained the picture of grace under fire. "I think our viewers are far more intelligent than you're giving them credit for," she said, her voice still steady but with a new edge of steel. "They're capable of forming their own opinions, which is why we present them with a range of voices and viewpoints." "Oh, please." Harry dismissed her with a wave of his hand. "Don't patronize me, Susanna. I've been dealing with your type my entire life. Journalists who think they're so important, so noble, when really, you're just gossips with fancy titles." The insult was direct and personal. Susanna had spent decades building a reputation as a serious journalist, someone who asked tough questions but always treated her guests with respect. And now she was being called a gossip on live television by someone who had agreed to be interviewed. "I'm sorry you feel that way," Susanna replied, and her professionalism in that moment was remarkable. "But I have to say, I find it quite disrespectful that you'd come on our show, accept our invitation, and then insult not just me but my colleagues in our audience." "Disrespectful?" Harry's voice went up an octave. "You want to talk about disrespect? How about the disrespect I've faced my entire life? How about having photographers chase my mother until she died? How about having every relationship, every private moment, every mistake plastered across newspapers for the world to judge? That's disrespect, Susanna. And that is truly terrible. I'm not diminishing that pain at all," Susanna said, her empathy genuine despite the attacks. "But what happened to your mother was a tragedy, and most people in this country, including journalists, were horrified by it. We learned from that. Standards changed, but you're painting all of us with the same brush, and that's not fair either." Harry stood up suddenly, startling everyone. "Fair? You want to talk about fair? Nothing about my life has been fair. And now I have to sit here and be lectured by someone who makes a living asking intrusive questions?" Susanna remained seated, looking up at him calmly. "I'm not lecturing you, Your Royal Highness. I'm simply trying to have a conversation. If you'd like to sit back down, we can continue talking." "I don't want to continue talking," Harry snapped. "This was clearly a mistake. I should have known better than to come on a show like this." "A show like what exactly?" Susanna asked, and there was a hint of challenge in her voice now. She'd been patient. She'd been understanding, but there's only so much disrespect one person can take. "A show that pretends to care about real issues, but really just wants to exploit people's pain for ratings?" Harry said, his voice dripping with contempt. "A show that's hosted by someone who thinks she's better than everyone else." That was the line. That was the moment where Harry went from being a troubled guest to being completely out of order. Susanna had never acted superior. She'd never been anything but courteous, and everyone watching knew it. "I have never thought I was better than anyone," Susanna said, her voice firm now. "I come to work every day to do my job, to inform our viewers, to ask questions that need asking. I'm proud of what I do, and I will not sit here and be insulted in this way." "Then maybe you shouldn't have invited me," Harry shot back. "You're absolutely right," Susanna said, standing up herself now. "Perhaps we shouldn't have, because I thought you came here in good faith, wanting to have an honest discussion. Instead, you've been hostile, dismissive, and frankly, quite rude from the moment you sat down." Harry's face flushed red. "How dare you speak to me like that?" And there it was. The entitlement laid bare for everyone to see. "I'm speaking to you the way I'd speak to anyone who came on this show and behaved the way you're behaving," Susanna replied, not backing down an inch. "Your title doesn't give you the right to be disrespectful to me or anyone else here." "My title," Harry laughed bitterly, "is the only reason you wanted me on this show in the first place. Let's not pretend this was about having a meaningful conversation. You wanted ratings. You wanted to say you'd interviewed a prince. Well, congratulations, you got your interview. What I wanted," Susanna said, her patience finally wearing thin, "was to give you a platform to share your views in a respectful environment. But you've made that impossible." Harry stepped closer to the desk, his body language aggressive now. "You know what your problem is, Susanna? You can't handle the truth. None of you can. You're so used to people bowing and scraping, playing your little games, following your rules. Well, I'm done with that. I'm done pretending that people like you matter." The crew behind the cameras had gone completely silent. This was no longer an interview. This was a meltdown happening in real time. Susanna held her ground, impressive considering a prince was essentially looming over her desk. "People like me? You mean working journalists who've earned their positions through years of hard work? People who didn't have their futures handed to them by birth?" It was a sharp response, but Harry had earned it with his constant condescension. "How dare you," Harry hissed. "You have no idea what my life has been like. You have no idea what it's like to be me." "You're right, I don't," Susanna acknowledged. "Just like you have no idea what it's like to be me, or to be any of the millions of people watching this show who work hard every day and don't have the privileges you've had. We all have our struggles, Your Royal Highness. Yours are not the only ones that matter." Harry pointed a finger at her, his hand shaking with rage. "You're just like all the rest. You're bitter and jealous, and you hide behind your desk pretending to be important." "That's enough," Susanna said, her voice cutting through his rant. "I have been patient with you. I have been respectful with you. I have tried to give you every opportunity to have a meaningful conversation, but you have shown nothing but contempt for me, for this show, and for our viewers. So I'm going to ask you politely, Please leave." Harry's eyes went wide. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," Susanna said, standing taller. "This interview is over. I'm asking you to leave." "You can't kick me out," Harry sputtered, disbelief written all over his face. "Do you know who I am?" "Yes, I do," Susanna replied calmly. "And right now, you're a guest on my show who has behaved inappropriately. So I'm asking you, as the host of this program, to please leave the studio." "This is outrageous," Harry said, looking around as if expecting someone to come to his defense. "You can't treat me like this." "I'm treating you exactly how you've treated me," Susanna countered. "With the respect you've shown, which is to say, very little. Now please, let's end this with whatever dignity we have left." Harry stood there for a long moment, clearly not used to being told what to do. The entitlement radiated off him in waves. He'd come onto the show expecting to be handled with kid gloves, to say whatever he wanted without pushback, and when he encountered a host who actually had a spine, he'd completely fallen apart. "Fine," Harry finally spat. "I don't want to be here anyway. This show's beneath me." "Then we're in agreement," Susanna said, her composure never cracking. "Goodbye, Your Royal Highness." Harry turned on his heel and stormed off the set, but not before throwing one final comment over his shoulder. "You'll regret this, Susanna. I promise you that." It was meant to sound threatening, but it came across as petulant, like a child who hadn't gotten their way and was lashing out. Susanna watched him go, then turned back to the camera. She took a breath, smoothed her jacket, and somehow managed to smile. "Well," she said to the viewers at home, "that didn't quite go as planned. We'll take a quick break and be right back." The professionalism in that moment was extraordinary. She'd just been insulted, attacked, and threatened on live television, and she handled it with complete grace. As the show cut to commercial, the other host turned to Susanna. "Are you okay?" he asked quietly. Susanna nodded, though her hands were shaking slightly. "I'm fine, but that was completely out of order." "He was awful to you," the co-host agreed. "You handled it brilliantly, though. You gave him every chance, and that was the truth of it." Susanna had been nothing but professional from start to finish. She'd asked fair questions. She'd listened to his responses. She'd shown empathy for his struggles, and in return, he'd been hostile, insulting, and ultimately, completely disrespectful. The moment the cameras had gone off, producers had rushed to check on Susanna. "We're so sorry," one of them said. "We had no idea he'd be like that." "It's not your fault," Susanna assured them. "Some interviews just don't go well. This one really didn't go well." That was an understatement. Social media had exploded within seconds. People couldn't believe what they just witnessed. A member of the royal family, having a complete breakdown on morning television, insulting a beloved host, and then storming off set like a teenager. But Susanna didn't care about any of that in the moment. She was focused on getting through the rest of the show, on maintaining the professionalism that she built her entire career on. When the show came back from commercial, Susanna addressed what had happened briefly but didn't dwell on it. "As you all saw, our interview with Prince Harry ended rather abruptly. We always hope for constructive conversations here on Good Morning Britain, but sometimes things don't go as planned. We respect that emotions can run high, especially when discussing personal topics, but we also have to maintain certain standards of respect in our studio." It was perfectly said. She acknowledged what happened without being petty, without attacking Harry further, without being anything less than the professional she'd always been. The rest of the show went smoothly, with Susanna moving seamlessly from topic to topic as if nothing had happened. But everyone who'd watched those 15 minutes knew they'd witnessed something extraordinary. Not just a celebrity meltdown, but a masterclass in how to handle someone who's being unreasonable, because that's what it came down to. Harry had been unreasonable from the start. He'd come onto the show with an agenda, with a chip on his shoulder, ready to be offended by anything and everything. He'd seen enemies where there were none. He'd taken reasonable questions as personal attacks. And when challenged, even gently, he'd completely lost control. Susanna, on the other hand, had been the absolute picture of how a host should behave. She'd been fair, she'd been respectful, she'd been empathetic right up until the point where Harry had made it impossible to continue. And even then, she'd handled his removal from the studio with class. The contrast couldn't have been starker. Here was a prince, someone born into unimaginable privilege, acting like a spoiled child who couldn't handle a simple interview. And here was a working journalist, someone who'd earned every bit of her success, showing the kind of grace under pressure that most people could only dream of. Harry's parting threat echoed in many people's minds afterward. "You'll regret this." But the only person who had anything to regret was Harry himself. He'd come on to one of Britain's most watched morning shows and shown the country exactly the kind of person he'd become. Entitled Angry, unable to take any criticism, and quick to lash out at anyone who didn't treat him like he was special. Susanna had nothing to regret. She'd done her job, and she'd done it well. She'd asked the questions that needed asking. She'd maintained her composure when faced with hostility, and she'd stood up for herself and her profession when someone tried to diminish both. The interview was supposed to be Harry's chance to share his perspective, to help people understand his point of view. Instead, it became a perfect example of everything people had come to dislike about him. The constant playing of the victim card, the refusal to take any responsibility, the lashing out at anyone who dared to question him, the inability to see that maybe, just maybe, other people's perspectives and experiences mattered too. What made it even more striking was Susanna's reaction throughout. She never lost her cool. She never stooped to his level. She remained professional even when he was being completely unprofessional. She showed empathy even when he showed none. She treated him with respect even when he treated her with contempt. That contrast told viewers everything they needed to know about who the real problem was in that studio. Harry had walked in thinking his title and his troubles gave him license to behave however he wanted. He walked out having proven exactly the opposite. That titles mean nothing if you don't have basic respect for others. That having difficulties in your life doesn't excuse treating people poorly. That being royal doesn't make you right. Susanna had walked in ready to do her job. She walked out having done exactly that, with her reputation not just intact, but enhanced. She'd shown that you can be tough and fair at the same time, that you can show empathy without being a pushover, that you can maintain standards without being inflexible. The whole episode lasted less than 15 minutes from start to finish. But in those 15 minutes, two very different people showed the world exactly who they were. One was a professional who knew how to handle difficult situations with grace. The other was someone who, despite all his advantages, couldn't handle a simple interview without falling apart. And that's really what made the whole thing so shocking. It wasn't just that Harry had a bad interview. Celebrities have bad interviews all the time. It was the sheer level of hostility he displayed, the personal nature of his attacks, the complete inability to engage in a normal conversation without seeing everything as a slight against him. Susanna had dealt with difficult guests before. She'd handled politicians who tried to dodge questions, celebrities who were defensive, activists who were passionate to the point of confrontation. But she'd rarely, if ever, dealt with someone who was so determined to be offended, so ready to lash out, so unable to see reason. The sad part was that Harry probably did have valid points to make about media intrusion and the pressures of royal life, but he never got to make them. Not really. Because he was too busy being angry and defensive to have an actual conversation. If he'd come in with an open mind, if he'd engaged with Susanna's questions thoughtfully, if he'd shown even a fraction of the respect she showed him, it could have been a powerful interview. He could have helped people understand his perspective. He could have built sympathy for his position. Instead, he destroyed any sympathy people might have had by showing them someone who'd lost all perspective. Someone who thought that being born into royalty meant never having to answer reasonable questions. Someone who believed his pain was the only pain that mattered. Someone who would attack a professional journalist for doing her job because he couldn't handle even gentle pushback. The most telling moment was when he'd said, "Do you know who I am?" That question revealed everything. In his mind, his identity, his title should have protected him from any scrutiny or criticism. The fact that Susanna treated him like any other guest, holding him to the same standards of respectful discourse that everyone else was held to, was apparently too much for him to bear. But that's exactly what made Susanna's handling of the situation so admirable. She didn't give him special treatment. She didn't let his title intimidate her. She didn't bend her standards just because she was dealing with royalty. She treated him fairly, which meant treating him like everyone else. And when he couldn't handle that, when he became abusive and disrespectful, she did what any self-respecting host would do. She ended the interview. She asked him to leave. She refused to provide a platform for someone who was using that platform to attack her and insult her viewers. It was a brave thing to do. Many hosts might have tried to smooth things over, to placate him, to let the interview limp to its natural conclusion. But Susanna recognized that continuing would have been wrong. It would have sent the message that it's okay to treat people that way as long as you're famous or royal. It would have rewarded bad behavior. By standing up for herself and her show, she sent a much better message. That respect is a two-way street. that titles don't excuse rudeness, that professional standards matter, regardless of who your guest is. In the end, what was meant to be Harry's platform became Susanna's finest moment. She'd been tested in the most public way possible, and she'd passed with flying colors. She'd shown strength without being aggressive. She'd shown professionalism without being cold. She'd shown that you can stand up for yourself while still maintaining your dignity. Harry, meanwhile, had shown exactly the opposite. He'd been given a platform and used it to attack. He'd been treated with respect and returned it with contempt. He'd been offered a chance to share his story, and instead threw a tantrum that revealed far more about his character than any interview answers ever could. 26 seconds. That's how long it took from Harry's first truly personal insult to the moment Susanna asked him to leave. 26 seconds that crystallized everything that was wrong with his approach and everything that was right with hers. Those 26 seconds would be replayed over and over, analyzed and discussed, held up as an example of how to handle someone who's being unreasonable and how not to behave when you're a guest on someone else's show. For Susanna, they were 26 seconds that proved she was every bit the professional people always believed her to be. For Harry, they were 26 seconds that revealed he'd become exactly the kind of entitled, out-of-touch figure he always claimed to be fighting against. The irony was almost too perfect. In trying to criticize the media and defend himself, Harry had provided the media with the perfect story, and in trying to paint himself as a victim, he'd shown himself to be something else entirely, someone who expected deference he hadn't earned, someone who demanded respect he wouldn't give, someone who wanted understanding he refused to show others, someone who thought his problems were so much bigger than everyone else's that common courtesy didn't apply to him. Susanna didn't have to say any of that. She didn't have to point out the irony or make him look bad. Harry did that all by himself, simply by showing who he really was when faced with questions he didn't like, and a host who wouldn't be bullied. The red sofa had seen many memorable moments over the years. Arguments between political opponents, emotional revelations from celebrities, heated debates about social issues, but nothing quite like this. Nothing that so clearly showed the difference between someone with real class and someone who just thought their class gave them the right to be classless.